I know that last week I left you hanging. I apologize for that. I over-prepared. I had too much information, and I built the problem up, and I got right to the end of where we had established that we have a problem, and then I was going to give the application, and I looked at the clock, and I was out of time. So I had to stop. And I've had a couple people tell me that this week. You left me hanging. I said, good, come back. And I'm glad that it worked out that way. Let me tell you why. I decided that I didn't want to leave anybody hanging. The application is the important part. So last week we talked about, what we're going to wrap up this week, and that is how do we deal with those who are outside the church, who are living far from God and that kind of thing. So then I was going to just start with the application this week, and God began to just give me more and more information that I think is going to be very applicable to you. And of the 3 people that sent the request in, 2 of those 3 had to do with family dynamics, had to do with communication. So part of what we're going to talk about tonight is going to be communication. Now, the title is going to be, you ready for this? Basic communication skills for dealing with unbelievers and the de-churched, as well as your family, your co-workers, your friends, your neighbors, and your grown children. How's that? But there's a problem with that, because then I'd only had this much space down here to put your notes. So I decided to change the title to, next slide, Witnessing by Listening. See how that rhymes? Witnessing kind of rhymes. Oh, come on, people. That's literary genius right there. That's why you pay me the big bucks. Witnessing by listening. See how it kind of rhymes just sort of a little bit? All right. Now, you don't know how to listen. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about that tonight. I don't know how to listen. She's honest. All right. I want you to listen to a quote by a guy by the name of David Kinnaman. He is the founder and leader of a place called Barna Research, and they are a full-time research firm that does all kind of research within the Christian body, within churches and that kind of thing, so that we can know how people feel outside these walls. Because a lot of times as churches or fellowships, we get real familiar with how we feel about stuff, but we don't know how the rest of the world feels. And we're trying to deal with the rest of the world. We don't really know how the unsaved and the de-churched and the unchurched feel. So that's what Barna Research does. Listen to this statement. I was sitting down. I'm sorry. My microphone doesn't like it if I sit down. My legs like it. My microphone doesn't. All right, listen to this if you will. He says that most unchurched and de-churched people, you understand the definition of unchurched and de-churched. Unchurched is I've never been to church, don't know why I should ever go. De-churched is I used to go to church, I got sick and tired of it, and I don't ever want to go there again. So of the unchurched and de-churched people, surveys have shown that when asked what Christian means, or to define what a Christian is, this is what they come up with. Very conservative, entrenched in their narrow-minded way of thinking, anti-gay, anti-choice, angry, violent, illogical people who want to convert everybody that doesn't believe just like they do. That should take us back. That should bother us. The problem is, I agree with that 100%. I have said all of my life, I am so glad that I was born into a Christian family. Because if I had not been born in a Christian family and raised from the time before I could walk, there's no way I'd have anything to do with the church. I've seen too much, I've heard too much, and I would give you that same description. I'm going to read it to you again because I think it's important that we understand what people outside the walls think about Christians. So listen to it again. Most unchurched and de-churched people associate the word Christian as very conservative, entrenched in their narrow-minded way of thinking, anti-gay, anti-choice, angry, violent, illogical people who want to convert anyone who doesn't believe like they do. And we wonder why they don't come to our churches. If that is the predominant view of people outside the walls, then we can have as many hot dog suppers as we want to. We can have as many blow-ups and trick-or-treat, trunk-or-treats or whatever. We can have all kinds of things to invite them to our churches. They're not going to come if that's their mindset. One of the underlying themes that I have had that God gave me 5 years ago because of the way that I feel, the things that I have seen. Now, I grew up knowing that God was real, and so when I doubted Him, when I went through a very difficult time and I began to doubt God, when I went through my crisis of faith, I came to my crisis of faith saying, I used to believe in God, but now I'm not so sure. Let me take a look at this analytically. See, that's why I'm lucky that I was raised in a church. That's the reason I'm lucky that I was raised in a Christian family. Because what most people are doing is they're coming to a crisis of faith, something that turns their world upside down. It's a death of a spouse or a spouse that cheats on them, or the death of a child, or cancer, or a car wreck, or the loss of a job. Something brings them to a crisis of faith in their life. At least in my case, in that crisis of faith, you begin to doubt whether God's even real or not. If He's real, then He must not be a very nice God if He's going to let this happen. At least in my case, I was coming at this crisis of faith like, I used to believe in God. Man, I'm wondering if I've been wrong all this time. People who are unchurched and de-churched are saying, I don't believe there's any God at all anyhow, and you can look at my crisis of faith, and that just proves it right there, that there ain't no God. See, so we've got our work cut out for us. We need to change the way people think about Christians. One of our underlying themes, one of the things that God gave me 5 years ago when He started giving me the idea and all the background information for Laugh, was we need to change the world's perceptions about Christians. Think about that. I know that's a huge goal, like, will we ever reach that? That kind of thing. But so sometimes we discount it. We'll never change the whole world, so we don't even try. Listen to what I'm asking us to do. 12 men 2,000 years ago changed the world. They changed the way that people thought about the Messiah. 12 men turned the world upside down. I've got 5 times that many in here tonight. We don't have to change the world. I'd kind of be happy if we could change Caldwell County. We can start with Caldwell County, but there's enough of us in here. But we need to have an underlying goal. Yes, we're doing Bible study. Yes, we're trying to learn as much as we can about the Bible. But we're not just so that we have biblical knowledge. There's seminaries full of biblical knowledge, and it's not worthless, but if it's not applied properly, it's not doing us any good. Our underlying goal here, and I want you to hear it again. I know I'm belaboring the point. I'm doing that on purpose. We here at Laugh want to change the world's perception of Christians. If you ask unchurched people, and I don't know, see, I do this. I'm just kind of, I'm not afraid of what people are going to say anymore. I used to race motorcycles, and I was surrounded by a bunch of atheists and agnostics and unchurched and de-churched people, but we raced motorcycles. We had that as a common bond. But I was surrounded by guys who asked me some very difficult, very direct questions, who didn't believe that there was a God. And I found out that I was very unprepared for that. I don't want you guys to be unprepared for that. I know that if you ask unchurched people what the church is for, now think about this. If you went to work and already, you can think, if I say go to work, if you go to work and you pick out 1 or 2 people who are unchurched or de-churched where you work, and you ask them this question, what is the church for? What does the church stand for? They'll have a hard time giving you an answer. If you ask them what the church is against, oh my word, sit down, because they're going to give you a long list of stuff that the church is against. I don't see that in Jesus. I don't see that model played out in Jesus. I don't see that model played out in the early church. And if you were here last week when the air conditioner wasn't working and it was steaming hot in here, you'll remember the verses that we had where the apostles were trying to say, what are we going to do with all of these unchurched and de-churched pagans who are accepting Jesus and they believe in who He is, and they're coming into our church? What are we going to do with them? What rules do we need? They need to follow some rules. So, and the scribes and the Pharisees that have been saved are saying, well, they need to be Jews. They need to be like Jews. They even need to be circumcised. And some other people are saying, no, we don't have to do all that because we're saved by grace. And so the apostles had to deal with this. And this is what we dealt with last week. And if I ever get the website up and going, you can watch the video. But it boiled down to this. The apostles said, we believe that we should do nothing to make it difficult for people to come to Christ. Throw out all the rules. Do not make it difficult. Nah, I shouldn't have said throw out all the rules. That's not really what they said. They said, listen, don't do anything that hurts your brother. Don't act like a stumbling block, and don't have any kind of affairs, adultery, and that kind of thing. Keep yourself clean. Other than that, farewell. We talked about that last week. That is a huge passage in the Bible that I have never, ever heard taught. That's what we have to understand. What do we have to tell these people who think that, well, for one, they think that we're kind of a church. And I tell people jokingly, I kind of tell them, I say, well, we are sort of like a church. They say, what's the difference between a Bible study fellowship and because they say, what is Laugh? And I say, it's a Bible study fellowship. And they go, well, what's the difference between that and a church? And I said, well, it's kind of like church except without all the pomp and the pretense and the politics. And they go, oh, okay. They get it. Because you know what people outside these walls think about church? It's a bunch of pomp, pretense, and politics. It's about who's in charge and what you wear and how you talk. That ain't who we are in here. But listen, outside the walls are who we're dealing with. That's who we're preparing for. We're not just preparing for ourselves. We're preparing how can we talk to other people outside the walls. You've got to know going in that they've got a tilted view of what Christians are. They've got a very negative connotation. We want people to know what Laugh is for, not what we're against. I want Laugh to be known for speaking life and blessings into people's lives. I want to teach people how to live in victory instead of pointing out their failures. I want to help people make godly decisions instead of condemning them for the bad ones that they've already made. And no, it's not the same thing. To help people make godly decisions instead of condemning them for the bad things is not the same thing. Helping them choose right is not the same as pointing out to them that they've chosen poorly. We'll get into that tonight. But you're going to need to understand that. Because again, what is the goal? And the goal in this communication is to not only, and this is not just talking, now the communication part that we're going to study this week and next week has a lot more to do than just witnessing. Okay, I need you to understand that. The skills that I'm going to teach you tonight and next week will work with unsaved and unchurched and dechurched people. Okay? And that's kind of the theme. That's the reason we're talking about it here in Laugh. But it also works the same way with especially your grown children and your co-workers and your family members and things like that. So we here at Laugh, we want to make sure that we help people make godly decisions. We teach them how to do that instead of condemning them for their bad ones. We want to teach people how to seek God as their first resort instead of their last resort. Now, if the world is that skeptical, if the world that we're talking about outside these walls is that skeptical about Christians, then how on earth are we supposed to get across to them? How are they ever going to listen to us if already they think that we're negative and condemning and a bunch of rule people who just want to make them believe like us? How are we going to do that? And that brings us back to the title, Witnessing by Listening. So let me share with you a type of communication that does not require you to be an extrovert. You do not have to be comfortable talking to strangers and all of that stuff, because I'm not going to ask you to talk to strangers. I know that you guys don't believe me because I stand up here in front of you, and I've been doing this for years, I still shake when I teach. I don't like talking in front of people. I wear long pants so that you can't see my knees knocking. Okay? But I have a passion for teaching God's Word. I don't like talking to people outside these walls. I don't like walking up to them on the street. I don't like handing out flyers. I don't like handing them a tract. My dad has never met a stranger. I can't tell you how many times we've been in an elevator. Well, he'll just ask the person beside him, how you doing? Do you believe in Jesus? And it embarrasses me, and I'm not even in a conversation. Okay? He's awesome at that. And there's people that are awesome at that, but there's a lot of us that are not. I'm not. So I'm going to teach you some things tonight and next week that'll help you, even if you're introverted, even if you don't like talking to people, you've got friends. Even if you're introverted and you don't have a whole lot of friends, you've got a few friends. And the ones that you're going to have the most impact on in anybody's life, I can say this universally to anybody in here, the people that you're going to have the most impact on in your life are going to be your friends anyway. The strangers don't have enough respect for you to listen to what you have to say. The strangers don't have time to argue with you, and nor do they want to. You just intimidate them. So everybody in here, no matter how timid, no matter how introverted, has friends. And I want to teach you how to have meaningful conversations with unchurched and de-churched people, as well as your family and your co-workers, friends, neighbors, and especially, I say especially, because maybe it's our biggest mission field, is our grown children. Sometimes we struggle to even be able to talk with our grown children when we feel like they're making poor choices. All right, there's 10 steps. There's no way I can do this in 1 week. That's the reason this is part 1. I'm not going to leave you hanging again like I did last week. Step number 1. Now, number 1, when you're talking to family, friends, co-workers, or people outside the church, don't try to debate. Don't try to debate others into becoming a believer. Don't try to debate people into making right choices. Very seldom, if ever, will you lead somebody to the Lord through a debate. Seldom will you lead somebody who's making consistently bad choices by showing them all of the facts and bringing out a chart with a bunch of statistics that show them why they shouldn't be making bad choices. There's an emotional element involved that statistics just won't cover. So don't try to debate others into becoming a believer or making right choices. There was a theologian from years ago by the name of William Barclay. And this is what he said: more people have been brought into the church by the kindness of real Christian love than by all the theological arguments in the world. More people have been brought into the church by the kindness of real Christian love than by all the theological arguments in the world. And there's example after example of this throughout history, where the early church Christians were taking and building into the community around them. And it is estimated that in Jerusalem, a city of almost 2 million people, by the year 2065, 50% were believers in Yahweh, in Jesus, that He was the Messiah. Gentiles and Christians alike. And that would be Jerusalem proper and the surrounding area. How could they make an impact on 50% of the population? Because they really believed what they did. They lived out what they said that they believed. And they were building into the community. They were selling their houses and selling everything that they had because they thought that Jesus was going to come back imminently. And you know, since me having a house when I've got a brother that has a need, and they were so helping other people that they were changing the culture that they lived in. That's the kind of change that we need to do. That's the reason that LAF has committed to 1/3 of everything that we take in is going right back out. Now, I haven't gone into the rule of thirds with you, and I'm not going to bore you with it tonight as far as the way that our financial structure will be planned. But I want you to understand that there's a reason we're meeting in a warehouse. There's a reason that your tables are plastic. There's reasons that we don't have tablecloths. The food here is really good. The fellowship here is really good. But the overhead is low. Most churches, and I realize when I say most churches, we're stereotyping, but they're stereotypes for a reason. Most churches spend between 56 and 64% of all they take in on salaries. They spend another 32 to I think it was 48% on overhead and lights and power and all that other stuff. The average church in America gives between 2 and 7% of everything that they give back out to the cooperative program, if you're a Baptist, or to the whatever it is. Independent churches, they'll give it to missionaries, between 2 and 7%. What's happening is you've got a group of millennials, a group of young kids who are coming up who are looking at that going, you know what? That's kind of dumb. You guys are all meeting together like it's some big clubhouse. You're taking up a bunch of money so that you can have a clubhouse next week to meet in. I'm not interested in that. And we're not either. So we are going to keep our overhead low. The elders are not going to be paid for a long time, and if we do get paid, it'll only be a percentage of what comes in, not a set salary. None of us have been paid anything for the first several months that we've been working here, and won't be for several more months. But even when we do, a third of everything that comes in is going to go right back out. Why? Because we're not going to be able to debate others into becoming Christians. We're not going to be able to argue them into becoming Christians. What we're going to have to do is we're going to have to live our lives in front of them in a way that they cannot deny what we believe in. The most powerful testimony that you have ever is what happened to you. I can debate whether or not Jesus was a real person. I can't debate what He's done in your life. I can debate with you that I can't. Why would God create us with 5 senses, but we can't use any of them to know who He is? We can't see Him. We can't feel Him. We can't touch Him. We can't taste Him. We can't, whatever the 5th one was, smell Him. I can debate that with you all night, or you could debate that with me all night. What you can't debate is what He's done in my life. You can't debate with somebody to lead them to the Lord. What you can do is you can share with them, you can share the love of Christ, and you can share what He's done in your life. So number 1, don't try to debate others into becoming a believer or making right choices. Number 2, people do not care how much you know until they know how much you care. People really don't care how smart you are. People really don't care how much theology you have. They really don't care how much seminary training you've got. People really don't care if you're Einstein. That doesn't help them unless they know whether you care for them. In any discussion that you have with your children, with your coworker, with an unchurched or de-churched person, whatever it is, if you try to go down the road of showing them how smart you are, you lost from the get-go. Because people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. James chapter 1 verse 19 says this, my dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. James is saying, my dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. He's saying, listen, pay attention. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. My daddy used to always tell me God gave me 2 ears and 1 mouth so that I could listen twice as much as I speak. You guys have probably heard that too. James is saying, the Bible is saying, we need to be listening more than we're speaking. People don't really care how much we know anyway until they know how much we care. Otherwise, now I want you to understand this. Because I'm using, there's a danger in using cliches. I mean, the good thing about a cliche, like people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. The good thing about things like that is you remember those. The downside is that you tend to kind of, oh, that was cute, and you blow it off. Here's what I want you to understand about that saying. If we do not listen to what people are saying, if we do not listen to their worldview, if we do not listen to where they're coming from, if we don't quit trying to analyze and correct and fix them and their opinions, if we don't start listening to them, then the message that we're so desperate to deliver will never be delivered. Because what comes across to them, what comes across to the person that you're trying to talk at, because you're not talking with them, you're talking Adam at that point, is that my worldview is better than your worldview. So let me tell you why I'm right and you're wrong. When you do the listening, that changes. It changes the whole dynamic. When you quit trying to interrupt them and interject, when you quit trying to fix it, when you quit trying to tell them how much you know, and you quit quoting them Bible verses and stuff like that, if you'll quit doing that, then they'll understand that you're really there to listen to them. They'll begin to get it. He really cares. She really cares. They really listened. They didn't correct me. So we've got to be careful that we don't send a message, a non-verbal message, that says my worldview is better than your worldview. So let me tell you why I'm right and you're wrong. And the Lord told me just a little bit before I got here tonight that I needed to cover one more thing. And so I do not have a slide for this. But it falls into place, and I need you to hear me, because there's nothing for you to look at and it's not on your notes. We do not befriend people so that we can evangelize them. We do not act like we are somebody's friend so that we can evangelize them, so that we can make them believe like we believe, so that we can lead them to the Lord. If we only befriend people because we are trying to evangelize them, then we are manipulating them. And I don't see Jesus manipulating anybody. So it falls under this number 2 of people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And that is, why are you talking to them to begin with? Are you talking to them because you love them? Because God told you to love them? Are you talking to them because you really care? Or do you have some ulterior motive that says, I want to evangelize you. I want to change you. I've got some answers that you don't have, and I would love to cram them down your throat at some point when you quit talking. Why are we evangelists? We're not trying to manipulate people. We're doing this. We should be doing this. And this is a motive check. Why are we doing this? And it needs to be because we love people. Now, down the road, we'll talk about the difference between love and like. And the Bible, praise God, tells us we got to love people. It does not say that we have to like them. But it's a motive check. You don't have to like them, but you got to love them. You got to care about their soul. Otherwise, you're just manipulating the situation. Number 3, and this is a big one, and this is the one that I've been talking about. So this might be borderline on the beating a dead horse thing, because we have talked about this for the last 2 weeks. In order for you to talk to, share with, build into other people, you're going to have to accept them right where they are. And we, as churchy people, have a very hard time with that. Why? Because there's something in us that feels like if we don't point out the sin, then we're somehow approving of it. Think of somebody in your life who you know is just living like hell. Think about them and think about whenever you see them, what goes through your mind? One is you avoid them because you don't want to be associated with somebody who's living like hell. Or 2, you have to fight everything that's within you to not point out that one area in their life where they're sinning. Am I right? We feel like if we don't point it out, if we don't talk about the fact that they're gay, if we don't talk about the fact that they're living together, if we don't talk about the fact that they're doing drugs, if we don't talk about what they're doing wrong, then somehow we're approving of it. And that's not true. And the only way that you will ever get to the next 7 steps in communicating with people outside these walls or your own grown children and family members is if you get past this. That's the reason I've been belaboring it the last 2 weeks. You've got to understand how Jesus sees people who are living in sin. He sees them as people. He sees them as people, and He loves them right where they're at. just like they are. We're going to have to do the same thing too. It is okay to accept people where they are. And if you still struggle with that, I want you to know that that's what Jesus did. And I'm going to give you a couple passages just to show you that. Accepting people just where they are. Go to the next slide. Matthew chapter 9, verses 10 through 12. Jesus has just called Matthew to be a disciple of his. Jesus is new on the scene. He's already in his late 29-ish probably, and he is already starting to collect people. He's already starting to say to people that although I don't have all the formal training, I am a rabbi. In addition to that, I'm actually the Messiah that you've been looking for 400 years. Follow me and I'll teach you these things. He's not picking up people at the synagogue. He's not picking up the cream of the crop. He did get Luke, which was a doctor, which was probably a good thing. But other than that, he picked up the people. I wish you could see this. I wish you could see this in the Jewish culture. If you could see this, the way this used to work in the Jewish culture, and I'd have to take all week to explain this to you, you would understand that he picked up all the people that nobody else would have. In the Jewish culture, you had certain things that you had to do by certain ages. You had to know the Torah. You had to know the Scriptures. You had to have a certain amount memorized. And by a certain age of school, if you weren't able to be in the top of your class, you no longer finished school under the rabbis. And you just went and you just got a job. Only the cream of the crop in the Jewish, after their what we call a bar mitzvah, after they became of age, very few were still following a rabbi. Most by that point, early teens, had to go get a job. They're mending nets. They're fishing. They're selling stuff in the street. They're doing whatever their daddy did. They're doing whatever their family does. Jesus is going around to adult men who have already been rejected by that system as not being smart enough. And he says, "You fishing? Yes, sir. You want to fish for men? Follow me." Hey, Matthew, are you a tax collector? You know why Matthew's a tax collector? Because Matthew's daddy was a tax collector. Because you had to bid for the right to be a tax collector. Do you know why everybody hated tax collectors? Because the Romans had Jerusalem in what would be considered kind of like a police state. The Roman guards were everywhere, but the Roman guards didn't run the local government. The Roman guards were there to keep any kind of clashes from happening, but the Roman guards weren't the police. The Roman guards didn't set the rules. The scribes and the Pharisees set the rules. The scribes and the Pharisees punished their own people. The only thing that they could not do was crucify somebody to death. They had to have Roman approval for that, so when we get to Easter, we'll kind of explain some of that. But what are the Romans doing? The Romans are there as a police state to keep everybody in check. So here's how they collected their taxes. They'd pick some people out and they'd say, all right, we're going to have a tax stand on the corner of Judah and Bethlehem, and we're going to have another one on the corner of 5th and Main. Who wants to bid for the tax booth? Somebody said, I'll bid on it. I'll give you X amount of dollars if you'll let me have that tax booth. Fair enough. You're the highest bidder. You get a tax booth. Now, I need X amount of thousands from you every year. I don't care how much you collect over that, but that's how much I have to have. And every month I'm going to come around to you and I'm going to take that minimum, but anything else you've collected above that, you get to keep. If nobody pays the tax, you let me know, because the Romans will be right there to arrest them. It's Jews who are bidding on the booth. It's Jews who then have to go to all of their neighbors and say, you got to pay your tax or I'm having the Romans come shut you down. And you're going to pay me 12%. Because Rome's taking 10. Or maybe it's 20% because Rome's taking 10. I don't care about your kids. I don't care that you don't have any money. I don't care that you don't have a job. You're going to pay me taxes. And all the rest of the Jews knew that they were making money off of their hides. And they hated them. They saw them as traitors of the worst kind. They saw them as the people who were exploiting their own race for money. Hated them. Hated them. Wouldn't have anything to do with them. And Jesus goes up to Matthew. Says, hey, you've already been rejected by the synagogue when you were 12. You've already been told that you weren't smart enough or you weren't good enough to follow a rabbi. And on top of that, then you fell into the family business because your dad's been bidding on this tax collecting region or area since he was about your age, and so now you're a tax collector and everybody hates you. How would you like to follow me? I'm a rabbi. I'm better than that. I'm the actual Messiah that everybody's been waiting for 400 years. Do you want to be a part of that? Follow me. That's to the religious synagogue scribes, Pharisees, Sadducees, absolute lunacy. It's one thing for you to go pick up some stupid fisherman, but you're picking up tax collectors too? Are you crazy? He goes, I'm going to do one better than that. So while Jesus was having dinner at Matthew's house, many of his tax collectors and sinners, which were the only people that would have anything to do with a tax collector, the scum of the earth, came and ate with Jesus and his disciples. And when the Pharisees saw this, they asked his disciples, why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners? And on hearing this, Jesus said, you should have got a 64-inch screen because I've cut the bottom line out. That's not what Jesus said. That's what I said. On hearing this, Jesus said, it is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. It's not the healthy that need a doctor. It's the sick. Why? If you say you're a rabbi, why? If you say that you're a religious leader, why on earth are you sitting in a house having a party with the known criminals in the area? What kind of a religious leader are you? I didn't come for the righteous. I came for those that need a Savior. It's not the healthy that need a doctor, but the sick. You guys have heard me ask this before, and you'll hear me say it again until you probably get sick of it. I'm so tired of traditional churches telling me and telling others what you got to look like and act like and dress like before you can come into their holy, holy, holy house. At what point can you be too sick to go to the doctor? At what point are you so sick that you can't go to the hospital? Bless God, this is not a holy, holy house. This is the hospital. We talk about the great physician, and we see his work, his hand at work here every week. You can't be too sick to come here. Now, where does this tie back in to our third point? And that is, acceptance is not the same as approval, because until you begin to see the people who act differently than you and talk differently than you and look differently than you and have sin in their lives, until you can begin to see them as people that you love, that people that Jesus loves, you won't be able to talk to them because you'll be condemning them in your mind. You'll be condemning them all the time. Matter of fact, you'll be uncomfortable that they're even around you. There's an example of that I got to tell you I'd be uncomfortable with. If you go over from Matthew to Luke chapter 7, verse 36, starting in verse 36, When one of the Pharisees invited Jesus to have dinner with him, he went to the Pharisee's house and reclined at the table. Now, all you guys, everybody used to wear those WWJDs. What would Jesus do? Well, I'll tell you what Jesus would do. He'd grab 3 strands of rope and make a whip and beat the people out of the temple. He would go to parties at the sinner's house, and he would even go to the Pharisees who were trying to kill him if they invited him to dinner, and he would go and eat with them. That's probably, to me, almost crazier than going to the sinner's party. Okay? A woman in that town who lived a sinful life. Now, that is a Bible way of saying that she was a harlot. She was either she did it for money, or she was a slut, or she was something. Okay? So you can't say slut in church. Oh, that's right, we're not in church. Woo! We're in a warehouse. Okay. She was a woman of ill repute, whether she did it for money or not, or whether she had been at the temple. Because remember, in pagan worship, they had a lot of sex and orgies and stuff that went on in the temple. Matter of fact, you guys have all heard of what a lot of people say, Baal, the idol Baal, you know. It's actually Baal. But Baal's, all of the temple, and it was a calf, you know, it was the golden calf and that kind of thing. And the children of Israel are out in the wilderness, and Moses goes up on the Mount Sinai, and he's up there too long. And so what they do, they throw all their gold into a fire and they make a calf. Why? Because Baal is their biggest god, and Baal has sex at the temple, and they've been out in the desert for a long time. Okay? They go back to what they know. This lady could have been doing it for a living. She could have been just one who sleeps around, like the woman at the well. And she could have been one who just believed that Jesus is the Messiah and just came out of the temple where she did it as a form of worship. Now, man, we're cutting off the bottom line. I'm going to have to do better than this next week on my slides. I am so sorry. I want you to see this. Jesus is at the Pharisees' house, and he's reclining at their table, because they didn't sit in chairs like we do. They recline. A woman in that town who lived a sinful life, and that's putting it nicely, learned that Jesus was eating at the Pharisees' house. So she came there with an alabaster jar of perfume. Do you know what she did after that? Then she stood behind him. Now, you got to understand that the types of houses that they had at that time were open structure houses, and so you didn't have a lot of walls, you didn't have a lot of gates, you didn't even have doors, because you didn't have any air conditioning or control, or a lot of times you had dirt floors, things of that nature. So if Jesus goes to the Pharisees' house, there's a good chance that she could just get in with the entourage that goes in with Jesus and all the Pharisees, because there's going to be a bunch of people there. Matter of fact, if you had Jesus at your house, that was a huge deal. So this was probably a huge party. Okay, not just Jesus and a couple of Pharisees and his 12 disciples having the Last Supper like you see it in the painting. Okay, this would have been a house full of people. She comes in with them. She comes in with them into the Pharisees' house. Okay, that would have been scandalous. You have no idea. We could go all night on that. That would have been absolutely scandalous for her to even be in the Pharisee's house. He would have probably been considered unclean and would not have been able to do temple duty for at least, I think it's 7 or 14 days. This was scandalous that she's even in there. That's not what, she's not just in there. Look at what she's doing. She stood behind Jesus at his feet, crying. The weight of who she was and what she has done has overwhelmed her. The forgiveness that she is feeling from Jesus, the forgiveness and that weight that has been on her shoulders for years is lifted, and she's crying. And she's crying as she clings to him, and she realizes that her tears are getting his feet wet. And she bows down and she begins to kiss his feet and try to dry his feet off with her long hair. I got to tell you, if I'm teaching in here and somebody that we know that's in the area, that's a prostitute, comes in, I'm good with that. I praise God she's in here. And praise God that she's willing to sit under the Word of God. And praise God that none of you are going to say anything out of the way to her after next week, after you've learned these 10 things, right? But I got to say, if she comes up here crying and she starts kissing my feet and pouring perfume on me, even I'm going to get a little bit nervous. Okay? That's just getting a little bit too close to home. What does Jesus do with this? She's pouring her expensive perfume on his feet. Now, this is not Mary and Martha, Mary. This is a totally different lady, okay? It's in time frames, very different. The woman that lived that sinful life learned that Jesus was eating at the Pharisee's house, so she came with the alabaster jar of perfume, and she began to kiss his feet. And Jesus, and they asked him, they said to each other, actually, they said, does he not know who this woman is? If he had any idea. Well, there it is. When the Pharisees who had invited him saw this, they said to him, he said to himself, if this man were really a prophet, if this man were a prophet like he says he's a prophet, he would know who's touching him and what kind of woman she is and that she's a sinner. Jesus allowed her to touch him. Jesus went on to say, do I have verse 40 on the screen, on the slides? I do not. Jesus goes on to tell them that he or she who has forgiven much loves much. Jesus scolded them, the religious leaders who questioned him, who questioned her. He scolded them instead of scolding her. There's not a mention in the Word of God that he says, honey, quit doing that. Honey, you're kind of embarrassing me here a little bit. We can do that later. Just I tell you what, just give me the perfume. You don't have to pour it on me no more. He never said that. He let her go. He never says anything to her. He addresses them as being the problem, not her. Acceptance. So that brings us back to point 3, because I'm going to have to close at the end of point 3, which means I'm going to have a long way to go next week. Acceptance is not the same as approval. It is okay to accept people just like they are. That's exactly what Jesus did. And you will not be able to go any further in this kind of study, in communication. You will not be able to get into the really deeper stuff that we're going to study in the next few points until you get it out of your head that you can accept people just like they are, and that does not mean that you're approving of how they live. You've got to understand that if you're going to reach people, you're going to have to reach them like Jesus did, and Jesus reached them right where they were, just the way they were. And I know a lot of good Christian people who really want to do, and they really want to witness, and they really want to have an impact on other people's lives, and they are cut short because they never get to do the things that we're going to talk about next week, because they can't get past somebody's past. They can't get past the sin that's in their life. They can't talk to them without condemning them. They can't talk to them without bringing this up. We're not going to be able to do that. If you want to go on and study the next steps next week to find out how to impact people for Christ, how to deal with your son or daughter who's making decisions that make your stomach sick, to your friends and your coworkers who are making bad decision after bad decision, and you're really wanting to help them, you're not going to be able to until you can love them the way they are. And understand that you don't have to approve of what they're doing, but you've got to love them just the way they are. Sorry. We'll do this again next week.